Well, hello, it's Andrew here again, and this is episode 76. Today we're in the second in our little series on the Sermon on the Mount, and particularly the Beatitudes. And just for context, I will read from the beginning. We're looking today at the second of the Beatitudes in verse 4. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Now, there have been volumes written on the Beatitudes. There have been countless hours of sermons have been written on the Beatitudes, and I've heard and read quite a bit about them. And they vary in terms of how people understand them, of the interpretations they give to them, and there's not, it would seem, a single approach. Everyone has their own view of what they mean. So, and I've come across some really interesting interpretations, and I don't have the time to go into them, to recall them and to study them and to put them before you. So I'm going to be taking a simple approach, and it is just what is more obviously there, and also what comes to me on the day. The reality is that there's clearly not just one way, and I'm not claiming to be that one way. I'll simply be sharing what has been helpful to me and I'm finding helpful today. It may not be the same tomorrow. Hopefully it will be helpful in some way to you. I've also noticed that this verse today is one clear example, is that various translations have different takes on the text. Now, the most common one is the one we heard of chapter 5 verse 4, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And you will see version after version after version just continue to parrot those lines, because they're the obvious, they're the literal, really almost word for word translation of the Greek. And some vary, and I'll come to those, a couple of those in a moment. But what it does is it allows us the most latitude in terms of when we just stick with the simple text and saying that it gives us the capacity to look at the breadth of what situations it might be referring to. And as I said earlier on, it depends on where we are on the day. What it tells me though, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, is that the first thing you need to do is to allow yourself to be able to mourn before you can be comforted. It's really pretty simple. And this doesn't always happen. Something happens, we're just so much often in a hurry to move on. Something happened that hurt us deeply. It may be what somebody did. It may be what somebody took from us. It may be something that we did that we just feel so wretched about and don't want to give any more thought to and just want to put it behind us. It may be a simple grief situation of something or someone that we've lost, a relationship that has ended, someone whom has died. And so we're being encouraged to be able to grieve it, to be able to mourn it, to be able to let ourselves experience the fullness of what that loss is like for us. Because if we don't, we will continue to carry it around with us. In my role as a pastor, I've seen people who have years later been at a funeral and they've suddenly found themselves grieving for a loved one whom they hadn't grieved for earlier. They find themselves reacting to this death, which was had nothing like the significance of the earlier one. And they find themselves as a basket case and realise that now they're having the opportunity to be able to grieve for this one that they lost earlier. It may be that at the time they are the ones that had to be the big person. They're the one that felt they had to hold it all together and to be in control. There could be any number of reasons. But I think that what Jesus is saying to us, that unless we allow ourselves to grieve, we actually can't move on. Not fully, not properly, not completely. And we can't move on to make a new beginning. There's a sense that before we allow ourselves to grieve, we cannot, in fact, discover the comfort that we need. If we don't think we need comfort, why would we be looking for it? I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me. But in fact, to allow ourselves to grieve allows the grace of comfort to be able to be extended and to be received. What I am hinting at is that if we're to make a new beginning after the end of something, we need to allow ourselves to grieve it. We need to now allow ourselves to actually say properly goodbye to it. We need to allow ourselves to experience it at a deep level, a sense of what we've lost. But my hunch is that when we do that, we will also start to see what we've gained. We might look back at what we've lost in the end of this, but also be able to see what it has given us. To see what graces that this relationship, this experience, whatever it was that we've lost, has given us. We might be able to experience a sense of seeing where we have been enriched by that which it was that we had and have now lost. And also see opportunities in the losing. Also see the possibilities of new beginnings as we start to pick up life again and move forward. And this is not to dismiss or demean or to diminish that which we've lost. My observation, and I've heard so many others say of it, that if the death of somebody that we've loved deeply, it takes first for the best part of 2 years before we start to come out of grief. And I hope this doesn't feel like a curse to you. But my observation is that's often been the case. Some people move on quicker, particularly if someone's been dying over a long period of time. That when they finally go, it's kind of like the end of a process which may have been going on for years and years. And it's quietly drawn it to a close and they're actually able to move on quite quickly. But where it comes out of the blue, sometimes it takes longer. And you need to give yourself permission to allow that to be the case. Now, that's with general grief. But there are other ways in which this is interpreted. In the Amplified Version, for example, it says, "Blessed, forgiven, refreshed by God's grace, are those who mourn over their sins and repent, for they will be comforted when the burden of sin is lifted." Now, there is a real grace in this, and that is, if that's the thing that you're struggling with, if you're feeling the weight and the burden of your sin, or have just a hint of it, and know that it's something that you may not want to actually face directly, this offers you a way forward. It offers you a way of finding forgiveness, of finding healing, of finding freedom and renewal, and a place for a new beginning. On the other hand, if you're in a grief situation that you've just lost somebody, this kind of is not going to push the button at all, is it? So there's a kind of play-off here between receiving one benefit and losing the possibility of another. So there's a kind of sense that we see the Amplified here has narrowed the scope. And it kind of reminded me of David, a number of incidents. We think particularly of his encounter with Bathsheba and the length of time it took him to recognise his need of forgiveness and his need of a fresh start. It was the best part of, it was 9 months before he recognised that he'd done something wrong, and he had to be directly confronted for it. And you can read all about that in Psalm 51. Psalm 32, though, the whole of the psalm gives a more general picture of the story of what happens when we actually carry the sin with us and don't allow ourselves to grieve for it properly and allow ourselves to be set free and move forward. Psalm 32, and I've read just the first 7 verses. Happy are those whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Happy are those to whom the Lord imputes no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. While I kept silence, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not hide my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore let all who are faithful offer prayer to you. At a time of distress, the rush of mighty waters shall not reach them. You are a hiding place for me. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with glad cries of deliverance. And so we can notice this transition from a place of obdurate unwillingness to face what David has done to an awareness that he is experiencing a measure of shame and grief about what has happened, to a place of confession, and ultimately to a place of deliverance and freedom and renewal. So that's one way of actually understanding this. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And it was when he came to a place of mourning, when he came to a place where he was able to confront his own sin, confront what he'd done, allow it to himself to see it full in the face, and to allow himself to accept responsibility for it, to mourn it, to grieve it, that he was then able to find comfort and freedom and a new beginning. It didn't any longer stick to his soul. It wasn't a dark blotch that continued to twist him out of shape and harden his heart. And that's one of the things that actually that kind of thing does, is it hardens our heart. So we become immune to the tender ministration of God to draw us more fully into life. So that's another way of looking at it. Finally, we see the message, Eugene Peterson's take on it. You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. And he's kind of got a point. It's when you feel and allow yourself to feel the loss of that and those people, that one who is, that relationship who is most important to you. It's at that point you can then feel that indeed, as the scripture promised, that underneath are the everlasting arms. That when you allow yourself to grieve, when you allow yourself to mourn, when you allow yourself to experience the fullness of that sense of loss, it's that point that we find that underneath comes the one who will always be present, always love you, the one for whom, in some sense, you're now making more room. So there we are. That'll be it for today. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God bless you.